How many of you know the television program or have seen the television program Everybody Loves Raymond? How many people? I know that my husband has. I know it's one of his favorites. Well, when we do Bible study, sometimes I will refer to that and I'll say, in the Bible, it's not everybody loves Raymond, it's everybody loves David. Everybody loves David. It is possible to see the whole of the Bible as being about David. It's all about David. All the heroic figures who precede him, all those who follow him, up to and including Jesus, can be connected, really must be connected to him. He is the ideal Nagib, the ideal prince of Israel. And when he is anointed by that title, Nagib, prince, not Melech, king, because God is the king. Now, David comes to us as this ideal character, but he wasn't the first Melech, he wasn't the first king, the first prince of Israel. We don't remember the first one who was anointed, Saul, in glowing terms. That's unfortunate. He wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't even a poor leader. He had a lot of success doing what he was called to do. He was called for one specific purpose, and that was to defeat the Philistines. He did that quite amicably, well. But he was tormented, and he was unsure of himself, and just couldn't get out of his own way sometimes. And so God chose another leader. And you heard in the story from the Samuel scroll today that God sends this great prophet Samuel, the kingmaker, to search for a successor. And the search took him to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, where 7 of Jesse's sons are brought before the prophet, all of them impressive, but none of them the chosen one. It's only when the most unlikely candidate, the youngest son, appears before Samuel that the prophet hears, this is the one, and anoints him, and the Spirit of God came mightily upon David. David was charismatic in many ways, politically, militarily, economically, socially, personally. Everybody loves David. He was a little guy who grew into the tasks set before him, and who is, even now, the measure by which all other Israelite monarchs must stand. Today, our youngest members reminded us that they are growing and that we are growing with them. In the parable of the mustard seed, the story that we heard about from the Gospel according to the School of Mark, Jesus talks about this little seed, and so I brought one with me. I brought one, there it is. It's so small, I was afraid if I put it into my pocket I would never find it. I'm not even sure I can hold it in a way that's visible. Anyway, it's there between my fingers. It's very, oh, that's it. There it is. It's very, very small. And so what Jesus is saying in that parable is that something very small can and will grow. We can miss this when we think about the mustard seed, this parable. A mustard tree is invasive. Once it starts to grow, it's really, really hard to contain. The mustard seed is not, in fact, the smallest seed, nor does it produce the largest shrub. But the contrast between what was planted and what ends up flourishing is truly dramatic. Jesus preached about a lot of things, and one of the most important things was hope in the realm of God. That was perfectly normal in his faith tradition, because human beings need hope. Hope is part and parcel of this long green season of Pentecost. Hope is invasive. It is radically inclusive. It surrounds and embraces everything we need and everything we want. Jesus offered hope. to those who heard him preach, talking about the coming of God's reign as a way of talking about the overcoming of the powers that oppressed people, whether as individuals or as communities. That was good news. That was gospel, especially for the poor and the hungry and the sick, the outsiders who were never too small for God's love. One of our tasks as followers of Jesus is to nurture ourselves as individuals and in community so that hope is realized here and now. We begin by sowing seeds, sometimes very small seeds of dialogue and mutual understanding, by cultivating acceptance and encouraging each other, especially those who have been marginalized, to participate in life in the church, in this church in particular, and in the church universal. Because we are all in a covenantal relationship. We can speak truth to power. We can open our doors and our hearts to include the other and not feel at all threatened by diversity. This week, I read a news story that I think illustrates the wonderful invasiveness, the expanding and expansive power of good that grows way beyond our imagination. I can start with something that seems small, a one-off thing, and it really, really flourishes. Maybe some of you saw this story as well. I'm going to summarize it now. This is a story that I read on CNN Online, and it said this: on the surface, James Harrison is just an average guy. He loves his daughter and his grandchildren, collects stamps, and goes for walks near his home on Australia's central coast. But it's what's under the surface that makes him extraordinary, especially what's flowing in his veins. Known as the man with the golden arm, nearly every week for the past 60 years, he has donated blood plasma from that arm. In 1951, when he was 14 years old, he had a lung removed. And he says, when I came out of the operation, or a couple of days after, my father was explaining, I received 13 liters of blood, and my life was saved by people I didn't know. My father was a donor himself, and so I said, when I'm old enough, I'm going to be a blood donor too. Soon after he became a donor, it was discovered that he had an unusual antibody in his blood, and he worked with doctors to use the antibodies to develop an injection called anti-D. It prevents women with rhesus-negative blood from developing Rhd antibodies during pregnancy. And so he and anti-D are credited with saving the lives of more than 2 million babies, according to the Australian Red Cross. That's 2 million lives saved by one man's blood. Every batch of anti-D that has ever been made in Australia has come from James' blood. He's now donated plasma more than 1,000 times, and he said, never once have I watched the needle go into my arm. Something inside each one of us can make a big difference. It might not be as specific and dramatic as James's gift, but whatever we have to give is important. As we confront the crises of the real world, of terrorism or AIDS or the rapidly growing disparity between the rich and poor, from within ourselves we can sow seeds of compassion and understanding and engagement and forgiveness. Those can and will grow, and they will become invasive. And as they do, the world will change, because it just simply will have to. Some of you may also know the name Quentin Crisp. He was a gay man with a huge, flamboyant personality who maintained a small apartment in New York City from 1981 until his death in 1996. And in some ways, oddly enough, he was quite bigoted as any homophobe, and I don't want to overlook that. He was not a saint, but he was a real raconteur, and among his many pithy and insightful observations is this: persistence is your greatest weapon. It is in the nature of barriers that they fall. The mustard seed is persistent. It will take over. Love is persistent. It can outgrow any barriers we think we've set up to contain it. We are the church, and we are the world in which the church exists. We are the seeds of change and of hope. Our persistence to reflect the love of the divine, to work individually and together for society, a society where all of us can be free to be who we are, to grow and to flourish where we are planted, that's a big deal, and no one of us is too small. To be persistent, to insist on justice and equality, to stand in the way of indifference and ignorance and arrogance, to become invasive for the common good, to grow where we are not planted. That's what Jesus' parable is all about. We're not called to do this because it's easy, not because it's profitable, not even because it's noble. We're called to do it because it is right, just right. And so, may the seeds of faithfulness and righteousness outgrow our imaginations and move us, no matter how big or small we are, to change anything and everything in the world in the spirit of justice, righteousness, and peace. Amen. As we finish our time